Welcome back everybody to yet another video, yet another TCG video. Let me know how you feel about this, but I feel like with YCS Hartford around the corner and European Nationals around the corner, everyone's just been hyped about TCG, me included. Master Duel season towards the end of the month. Really not that much going on, but let me know if you feel different, if you want to see more Master Duel content, or if you're happy with just mostly TCG content at the moment. Let me know in the comments below, but without further ado, I've been asked a ton on my live streams about, what do you think about this deck in the new format? What do you think about this or that deck? And I thought, why not just make a short, condensed version where I talk for like 1 or 2 minutes about each individual deck that I felt was worth talking about in the current format. And, that's what this is. And without further ado, let's get into it. Let's move over here. And I've lined up most of the relevant decks I feel like for the current format. Now, keep in mind, I've been playing this format for like what feels like to me, I'd guess like a month or so. So I don't have an opinion on every single deck. So I only included the ones that I felt like were worth talking about and that I also have something to say about. So I know this is not the complete list of every single deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is just not possible in like a, I don't know, what I want to be a 10 or 15 minute video. If there's any deck missing here, let's make a deal, okay? If there's any deck missing that you want my opinion about, you can just comment that deck down below with a question mark. You'll say like, oh, where's I don't know, what deck's missing here? Where's Earth Machines? Question mark. And then I'll respond with either I don't know enough about the deck to answer that, or I don't like the deck enough to include it. Okay, so that way I can give you guys a short answer for any deck that might be missing. As far as the categories go, this is not a typical just tier list. I'm just using a tier maker to like divide them into different categories, but this is not straight up like, oh, the higher the deck is, the better it is. I've put them into 4 categories that I often use when I answer the question of, do you like X Epsilon deck? There's decks that are just solid choices, and those are like definitely good. I'm gonna put them into the good choice category, pretty obvious. There's a category here that I named I wouldn't do it, but you could, which basically refers to decks that are definitely solid, but for a specific reason that I'm going to name when I get to decks in the category, I personally will not bring them to tournaments this format, right? If you have those decks, if you like those decks, or if you just pilot these decks exceptionally well, those are still good choices, but I personally prefer other decks. But you can still definitely play those decks and do well. Then I made a category for decks that I think have potential, decks that are still unexplored, but simply could end up being a very good choice, or could end up in the category of I wouldn't do it, but you can play them, or even not a good choice. These are basically decks where I see potential. I am still working on them, or maybe I'm not working on them, but I think it could be worth it working on those. But yeah, just decks where I see potential that hasn't been like unfolded yet. And then there's decks where I straight up think it's not a good choice. Like I wouldn't play those, and if you really plan to do well at a YCS or a national or even like bigger regional tournaments, you should probably look into different options, and that's what the not a good choice category is for. Let's just get right into it. I'll try to talk for like 1 or 2 minutes about each individual deck and just quickly let you know what my impression of that deck in the current format is. ABC Therion Brave is definitely a good deck. For me personally, this is a deck that goes exactly into this category right here of a deck that I don't blame anyone for thinking this deck is good. I don't blame anyone for bringing this deck to a tournament. For me personally, it's not the deck because it feels like it's a little bit too inconsistent. It's a little bit too dependent on opening hanger plus combo pieces. I'm not a fan of decks that like really depend on a single card, even if you can run Prosperity in this deck. I would personally prefer a deck that gives me a chance to play out every single game with most hands, whereas this deck is so dependent on having a hanger. Going first though, this deck is very, very strong if it does end up opening hanger, so it's still a very scary deck to go up against. It's just not the deck of the type of deck that I would want to play. But if you're fine with, trying to win the majority of your dice rolls, and then if you open hanger, you're probably going to win most of the games, it's definitely still a scary choice. Now, I've included Alistair, like, as a, like, invoked Shaddolls, Dogmatica kind of pile. The deck is still not terrible. I just think that there's a lot of decks in the format that simply do better at a lot of things. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend you play Invoked at anything that's like a big level tournament. Pendulums is to an extent unexplored, so I could see myself throwing this into the potential category, and I will end up putting it here. I do lean more towards, even if I tried Pendulum, it would probably end up in either I wouldn't do it but you can category, or in a not a good choice category. There is small hope for like a good build to end up as like actually being a very good choice. I just think Pendulum always has this problem of not being able to play a lot of non-engine cards, and therefore being relatively mediocre when going second. The deck has some board-breaking capabilities, but overall I think it has some potential, but I'm not too hopeful for Pendulums. Now, okay, we got branded up next here. Let's actually talk about pure branded Despia first. I'm throwing this deck into the good choice category simply because, yeah, I've been complaining about this deck a lot when it comes to, you know, oh, it feels bad that you lose to D-Barrier, you lose to Anti-Spell, you lose to Super Poly. This deck has a lot of blowout cards against it, but at the end of the day, it's still on your opponent to actually having to draw these cards. At the end, if they don't, you still pretty much win the game most of the time. The deck is very consistent. The deck is very powerful if played correctly. It has a very high skill ceiling, and the deck, just most hands simply play through a lot of disruptions and a lot of boards. Deck's a little weak to Ash and has a couple other blowout cards against it, which is why I would personally like to see, you know, maybe a different deck being my choice for Nationals. But let me tell you, if Nationals was right now, which I don't know what I'm going to bring to German Nationals yet, but if it was tomorrow, I would be bringing Despia. That is what I would do right now, and that's why I have no choice other than to put it in the good choice category. This deck's definitely solid. You're gambling a little bit against the blowout cards, but at the end of the day, you're still favored, I think, to do well in the tournament with Despia. Now, Brave Despia is something that is somewhere between these two. Like, I don't think the deck is bad. That's why I'm going to throw it here, because the inclusion of the adventure package makes the deck much more resilient against Ash Blossom, which is very, very good. It also helps the deck break some boards going second, potentially even beat a D-Barrier if their opener is not super strong. Like, the adventure package can help you live a turn, maybe bounce a card, set up a Griffin. If they didn't open great. But even then, like, under D-Barrier, you can like pitch a Despia with Fateful Adventure and set up a Branded in Red on the opponent's turn. You know, they give you some outs to spots. Like, it basically makes the pure Despia deck less linear. The problem is with the ban of Anaconda, the deck really needs to draw Branded Opening or Branded Fusion directly. There's no way for you to like combo into an Anaconda in case you don't draw Branded Fusion or you know something gets interrupted. So you're really looking at the deck that needs to draw specifically the Adventure Package and the Branded Fusion or Opening for it to be very good. If it does, though, it's a very, very strong deck. If it does do that, if it opens those two consistently, it's actually, I'd say, better than pure Despia in those specific cases. Overall, though, I think it's worse. I would rather play this deck than the ABC deck, though. So I'm actually going to throw it here, to be fair. Yeah. So that's my opinion on the two Despia versions right now. Drytron, honestly, I thought about it. I've seen some deck profiles. We've watched some on stream. We've looked at some combos. I'm not a fan of Drytron. You could argue for it to be roughly in the same spot as Pendulum, though. So if I put Pendulum in the potential category, I think I have to throw Drytron here as well. The deck is very strong going first. If it opens the combos, pretty much every deck loses to it. At the end of the day, though, it's very bad at breaking boards. Probably worse at breaking boards than Pendulum. And that just makes it, at best, usually like a 50-50, right? You win the die roll, you go first, you win. You lose the die roll, you go second, you probably lose. And that's just not something I like. You can experiment with it. I'll put it at the very bottom of the potential category. But both Pendulum and Drytron, I think, are probably in the not a good choice at the end of the day if you end up exploring them. Eldlich. Eldlich is 100% one of the core representatives of the I wouldn't do it, but you definitely can. The deck is good. The deck wins a lot of game ones because of floodgates. And actually, you know, people are kind of lucky that, you know, good players tend to not play Eldlich, simply because there is still a big difference between someone who knows how to grind with Eldlich if they don't draw floodgates and someone who does not. The deck is still good, very powerful deck, can't deny that. Personally, not the deck for me because I think it becomes very weak post-side. Even if you win game 1s very consistently, you're gonna get smacked around game 2 and 3 very often. Also, the deck gets smacked around just in general by good players, which is something I'm not looking for. Like, it's one of those decks that I'm pretty sure if I played it at Nationals, I could probably make top cut, and then at some point in top cut, I would just lose to someone who knows what they're doing or draws their back row hate in both games in game 2 and 3. And that's why I don't see this deck ever really winning a tournament unless you get very lucky. And so simply because I try to play decks that definitely can win tournaments, I would not bring Eldlich. But if you're just looking for something solid, you know, something that's also not too expensive, if I'm correctly here, you can definitely play this deck, right? I'm not gonna sit here and tell you Eldlich is a bad deck. I just don't think it's the best choice. So, you know. Salamangreat, a deck very dear to my heart. I would love to tell you this deck is a good choice. I'd love to just throw it here, but I'm not sure on that. It is in the potential category for sure, though. I've been playing around with it on stream, which, by the way, if you haven't been watching the stream, link's going to be in the description below. I've been having a lot of fun with Salamangreat, and I've not been doing bad with it. At this stage, though, I am not convinced yet that it is a choice for me to play for Nationals. I would love for it to be, but it simply isn't yet. I think there is something there also with the adventure package, but I haven't found a way to make that deck like close to 40 cards, which I think it has to be. Like, if you're playing Salad with adventure, I think it needs to be close to 40 cards because you need to open your Buffalo plus Cybers consistently. Otherwise, you need to take out Buffalo, which is a very good card, and you can't play Debug to replace it because of Brave. But at the end of the day, the Brave engine would help the deck beat Nibiru and go second against Mirror Jade. But, you know, I haven't figured out a list yet, simply. I'm gonna try and work on it, simply because I love Salamangreat so much. But I can't throw it into anything better than just potentially it's a good deck. But I can't really say at this point that it's a good choice. But it's a good budget option for sure. DDD goes right in line with Invoked as a deck that is not bad. I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking and playing with this deck, but I mean, it can play a couple of hand traps, it can set up solid boards, but at the end of the day, it doesn't do anything better than other decks out there. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend DDD right now, plain and simple. Now here we got something that I'm gonna throw in the potential category. This just stands for Hulk Red Rose Adventure, some kind of, it's basically based, right? Yeah, there's just a lot of ways to how you can still play this deck. It's got a huge hit with like the Anaconda ban, and I feel like people simply don't know what they want to end on yet. But if someone figures this out, if someone spends the time to actually like work on a deck list that is like good enough to win going first, and doesn't play that many bricks, and can decently go second, maybe with a couple of hand traps. You know, it's a lot to ask, but the potential is there. If someone finds something here, we could be looking at definitely a good choice that is like versatile enough to like, it probably gonna focus on synchros, but if you put a couple of link climbing stuff in there, you're not gonna lose too hard to like D-barrier. There's not that many blowout cards against adventure, so if you can make this deck viable, you would have like less blowout cards against you post side. So I would actually like that. So I definitely think there's potential here. I don't have anything in mind that like would like the end board, right? You can do so much. You can scythe, you can focus on like heart negations. There's even ways to like, I don't know, King Calamity, what people are doing with like the punk stuff. We'll get to that, but you can throw punk into this deck. There's so many ways to play this deck. That I'm sure if someone worked on it long enough, they could probably find a good version. But since that hasn't been done yet, I can't tell you that this deck is a good choice yet, but I think there is something here. Ignister, a deck that 2 days ago I might have probably not even included in this tier list, but yesterday on stream someone asked me to try Ignister, and I did. And I actually ended up liking it. And the reason why I'm gonna put it into the definitely potential category here is that this deck is a great budget option. This deck is very, very cheap and plays very similar to Salamangreat in my eyes, where or maybe even Prank Hits to an extent, because it does a lot with just one card. It can play a decent amount of hand traps. It can play some board breakers if you want to. It has a lot of room for non-engine. The combos with Cyverses in general, which is something that Salamangreat and Ignister profit from, are very, very strong. And also something that I'm going to mention here about Salamangreat and Ignister is that these decks have become significantly harder to hand trap now because of the Decode Talker Heat Soul. It's really, really hard to hand trap these decks to a point where they can't summon Heat Soul. It's basically only Nibiru. If you Ash Imperm Veiler these decks, because of like Splash Mage, as soon as they get 2 Cyvers on the board, they're still gonna end on Heat Soul, draw 2 cards, which both of those decks run a lot of hand traps, so that's always still an acceptable end board, right? It's not the most impressive, of course, but keep in mind you only do that if you get hand trapped at least 1 or 2 times, so your opponent's only going to be on 4 or 5 cards, and you're playing a deck with, you know, 12 plus hand traps that just drew 2 cards. So, you know, at Ignister, very cheap and actually very playable in my opinion. I wouldn't be shocked if a couple of those made top cut at a couple European nationals, or even like 1 or 2 top YCS Hartford. And yeah, been pleasantly surprised by this deck. Now, something that I've been, probably the deck I've been asked about the most is Punk Therion. Punk Therion is, in my opinion, a good deck. And I'm not even gonna put this into the potential category. I'm gonna actually put this at the bottom of the good choice category, because I've played this deck enough to know that this deck has something going for it. Whether you think it's better than Despia or the other decks I'm gonna put into the good choice category is up to you, but this deck is powerful. And just to answer anyone already, I know the questions are gonna come. I prefer this deck without the Adventure Engine, because if you play the Adventure Engine, you cut your potential starters for the Punk Engine down to just Teleport. Whereas if you don't play the Brave Engine, you can start with Zeamin, you can start with Ogre Dance. It just ups your number of starters from the Punk Engine to a potential 9 copies instead of just a 3 Teleport. Now, if you draw Teleport, the Brave Engine is obviously very, very busted, and that version is just like unstoppable. But in order, like, just for consistency's sake, I feel like run the Therion version, which the Therions also allow you to play around hand traps with Regulus. I like this deck. The perfect version I don't think has been found yet, but I think this deck is definitely better than just, I can't just put it into potential category because I know this deck's good. The deck list needs to be figured out still, but you know, that is that. Now, Mystic Mind's Sky Striker got second place at Austrian Nationals. This deck 100% goes here. I'm not gonna bring this deck. The reason being, this deck wins game 1 most of the time against most meta decks, very, very clearly. But post-side, I think this deck becomes pretty bad. And also, if you're playing a high-caliber tournament, people are going to know what you're playing at some point. Like, if you try to do well at the regional top tables, or like nationals or YCS top tables, even top cut, people are going to know what you're playing. People are going to make you go first game 1. People are pretty much always going to OTK you game 1 if they make you start. It's not a viable strategy for big tournaments because of that. It's viable, it's still scary, but I wouldn't advise you to bring that deck. I think it's scary game 1, but post side, and if people know what you're doing, and yeah, I mean, yeah, you get it, right? You get it. Don't do this. Floowandereeze is annoying. Everyone hates Floowandereeze, but I can't help it but tell you guys that this is somewhere between very top of this category, or even good choice. I personally don't see myself playing it. That's why I'm putting it in this. I wouldn't do it, but you can definitely play this deck and do well with it. To me, it feels a little bit too gambly, to where it's just a little bricky, you know? It's just a little bricky. Every deck except for Branded plays a very good amount of hand traps, you know, your Veilers, your Imperms, and those can really ruin your day if you only open 1 starter and no Book of Moon. It feels risky to me, and I like to have decks that are like you know, consistent. I simply want a chance at every single game if I play it well, and this deck doesn't provide that. Like, it has a lot of auto wins, but it also has auto losses, and I'm not a fan of that. If you are, you know, good for you, play this deck, alright, but I feel like if you're trying to go X2 or better at like 11 round tournaments, I think this deck's not the best one. Like, just like, yeah, going like first game 3 and then breaking and just giving the match away doesn't feel that great, but you know, it's still viable. I can't really deny that, but yeah. Striker and Striker Brave Dragon Link, well, not Striker, Dragon Link with Striker Dragon, I think has potential. I think people have been writing this deck off because of the Albaz fusion, the Alba Lenatus. And I think there's ways around it. First of all, people aren't even playing that card because no one's playing any dragon decks. So for the most part, the card doesn't exist. And even if it does, there's ways to play around it. You can simply summon Heradic Seal. And if they set a monster, you can tribute Heradic Seal, bounce your own card, and summon Koakimeru Drago from your deck, which doesn't allow your opponent to special summon any lights or darks. And suddenly you've locked out Despia completely. They can't super poly anymore. They can't do anything because they just set an Albaz, so they're basically going to pass and you're still going to win that game. So there's ways around Alba Lenatus. This deck can still make great use of the adventure engine. This deck still has broken spells with Chaos Space and Quick Launch. You can play a decent amount of hand traps. This deck's good. This deck has potential. I'm not sure if it's going to end up, you know, being the best deck or anything, but definitely don't hate this deck. This deck right now, the planned Therion deck, is at the very top, I think, of the I wouldn't do it, but you could, next to Floowandereeze. I like this deck. I actually don't hate this deck. It feels a lot like Prankids with a couple of... It's a worse deck of Prankids, a worse version of Prankids, but Prankids doesn't exist anymore, so that's not really an argument. It's still, it's a powerful deck because it probably has the Brave Engine and Regulus, which makes this deck pretty much unstoppable going first. Like, it's impossible to hand trap this deck unless they get really unlucky because they also run cross out most of the time. And it's just, it has a 10 one-card starters and a bunch of hand trap negations. If it goes first, the deck's crazy. I don't see it breaking boards super consistently going second. I mean, it does have the Brave Engine. It can fit some amount of hand traps. Overall, I'm not a fan of its chances going second, but I'm a really big fan of its chances going first, and it's a little better going second than other decks that I put at the very bottom here, like Drytron or Pendulums. It has at least a couple of ways to hand trap and break boards, but overall, little too volatile and a little too restrictive in terms of your extra deck, you know, as opposed to like Prankids, where you could link climb into stuff like Access Code, Charmers, whatnot. This deck can't do that because you're locked into plants, but it's a solid deck. I personally wouldn't play it, but I think it's very close to being viable. Yeah. Okay, Swordsoul, quick. This deck is definitely a good choice. This deck can run a lot of hand traps. Tennies are very good at breaking boards. Ecclesia is very good at breaking boards, so even going second, this deck is still very, very scary. Going first, this deck is good. It just feels a little bit too fair for me sometimes, which is why I'm not like telling you, this is tier 0, oh, everyone should play this. It's, if you see all the lines, it can play through hand traps very well, but at the end of the day, your end board still feels somewhat fair to me. And it does struggle against Nibiru, which everyone is siding right now, or like almost everyone is siding Nibiru right now, which is also why, you know, I have a little doubt in the Salamangreat and Ignister stuff, but Swordsoul is like a very solid deck right now. Very, very good choice. If you're not happy with anything else, you know, you can definitely just play this deck and do well with it at a tournament. It also rewards like skill and experience with the deck. I feel like when I first started playing this deck, I definitely made a couple of mistakes. Didn't see a bunch of the lines that you can do, like the Yazi and Baxia and Taya Sent and the Tennies. Open up a lot of different lines of play. I like this deck. Definitely a good choice. Last but not least, Virtual World. Throwing it at the very top of the potential category. I think this deck is very, very overlooked right now. It did win the regional I attended a couple weeks ago. That was pre-DIFO. But this deck making like crazy good end boards with like the Hyper Psychic Riser against Despia is very, very underestimated. And it's not super weak to any floodgates except for maybe... Is D-Barrier even that good against it? You can probably play under D-Barrier into like some XYZs if you include some like Zeus the board and stuff. You have the Brave package to play around hand traps. You have Chuchi to deal with any main deck Mystic Mine shenanigans, any main deck Floodgate shenanigans. Chuchi in general, just a really good card because it also makes your board a little more resilient against stuff like Droplet or Dark Ruler no more because you're not just focusing on monster effects. Deck's fairly consistent. Deck is strong. Deck is strong, I think. Whether it's actually going to be a good choice remains to be seen, but I do see potential here. Overall, okay, I see this video. Okay, this turned out a lot longer than I expected it to be. I hope that didn't bother you. I hope this was interesting. I hope this helps you when deciding, you know, what to test going forward for YCS Hartford or Nationals. Maybe not Hartford because that's like this weekend, but yeah, if there's any deck I'm missing here that you really want to know about, like I said in the beginning, comment down below and I'll let you know if I didn't include it because I didn't like it or because I just don't know enough about it. That's the deal here. Other than that, feel free to leave feedback in the comments below and check out my stream if you haven't yet. I'll be doing a watch party for YCS Hartford Top Cut on Sunday. So if you want to, you know, hang out and watch me commentate Hartford, feel free to follow already, and I'll see you guys on Sunday in that case. Other than that, this is it for the video. I hope you guys found it helpful, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, peace out, and yeah.